So let's see. Susanna, could you get the lights for me back there? Thank you very much. And I think having these down like this is nice because it's enough light for you to write with, right? Okay, I'm going to wrap up Northern Ren today, or try to get through it all. We left off talking about Northern Renaissance and only gotten through sort of half of that sheet, but there's some important artists here that we really should talk about in the Low Countries, which remember is where Van Eyck came from, right? And as we were looking at Northern Renaissance art, as opposed to Italian Renaissance art, by northern we mean north of the Alps, right? Venice is north of Florence, but it's not northern, it's still Italian, right? Northern Renaissance north of the Alps, and we're focusing primarily on the Low Countries, but also on Germany. When we looked at Dürer, we saw that the legacy of Van Eyck was really strong in that Dürer picked up that interest in sort of tightly observed details, rendered precisely, right? And we saw that with his watercolor of the plants, and we saw it with the animals and the Adam and Eve, right? That he's very much interested in that same sort of precision that Van Eyck had pioneered, or at least had perfected. And as we go to Van Eyck's own country, we see that same interest in sort of sharply observed, precisely rendered details. And so Matthijs, in both of these, gives us a sort of Eyckian, it's a nice word, isn't it? Eyckian realism, right? And we can see with the money changer on the right that we have those resin prayer beads, the light shining through them, a convex mirror in the foreground. You probably knew the Arnolfini wedding picture because there's a guy in a red turban in the mirror as well, right? It has that same interest in realism. Now, as we move to the 16th century, one of the things that changes in the Low Countries is the center of activity. In the 15th century, we saw Roger van der Weyden in Brussels. We saw Jan van Eyck in Bruges. And we also saw, as we looked at the 15th century, that a lot of art in Northern Europe was still being commissioned by churches and old feudal leaders like dukes and counts and kings, right? Whereas in Italy, we had seen a sort of shift to a more democratic kind of art being made for people from the working class. Very well-to-do people from the working class, but people from, right, the trades, merchants, bankers, right? Self-made men commissioning works of art. It's a huge shift. So a lot of people talk about the Renaissance as the beginning of the modern world because of that shift of focus away from the people who are born to power to the people who make their station in life. As we move into the 16th century up north, we start to see that same shift take place. And so the major center of art follows the major center of commerce in Northern Europe. And this was true in the 15th century in Italy, right? The reason Siena and Florence were such a hotbed of artistic activity is because there was money there. Antwerp becomes a center of art production because there's money there. And you have to think about it. You have to be pretty well off to be buying art. Now, as someone who's the chair of the art department, I'd like to tell you that art is a necessity, but it isn't if you're starving. You know, if you've got a choice between feeding your family and buying a painting, what are you going to do? If you have a choice between putting a roof on your house or decorating the walls, right? What are you going to do? It's not the necessity in the same way, right? You need excess capital in order to buy art. And so when we find as art stops being the exclusive production for people like kings or popes or bishops, and starts being produced for the common man, the people who are buying it are the very well-to-do. And the places where we see the most art made are the places that are comfortable, right? Profitable. Antwerp is a huge port city, right? It's right on this massive river, leads to the North Sea, very deep, very wide, very calm. To this day, Antwerp is one of the most powerful ports in all of Northern Europe, right? And this is where art production shifts in the early 16th century, right? And the reason it shifts is there are buyers there. And the Artists Guild, right? We talked about guilds before. The Artists Guild is packed with hundreds and hundreds of names, some of whom we have no idea who they even were, because it was still something of a tradition to not sign your works, right? So mass flowering of artistic activity in Antwerp in the early 16th century. With this incredibly strong art market, packed with practitioners, packed with artists, what we find is that many of the artists will pick up a particular specialty, with the idea that if you're good at one thing, then when people want that, they'll come to you, right? So I use the example of like, you know, with economics, there are sort of two ways to succeed. One is you can be all things to all people, right? Market to everybody. You could be a restaurant like TGI Fridays that serves both pizza and burgers. Neither of them very good. Hope I'm not offending anybody, right? Or you could be a pizza place and do it really well, and people know that that's where you're going to go, right? There was an article in the Times this week about John's Pizzeria in Greenwich Village in New York, and suing a company that calls themselves John's of the Village in Brooklyn, because they really are the best pizza in New York, and everybody's known it for decades, and some place trying to cop on it, right? So artists take this model. They could either try to do everything for everybody, hope to get a little skim across the top of any kind of art commission, or specialize in particular kinds of scenes and sort of corner that part of the market, right? And so what we see in Antwerp in the 16th century are artists who start to specialize in particular varieties of art. Not exclusively, but more predominantly, right? So Quentin Matsys, focuses on what we call genre scenes. The term genre scene, when we talk about it like this, genre scene, means in the history of art a scene of everyday life, a non-event, right? It is just the sort of things that happens around you, again, closely observed. So on the right, a money changer in his shop. This is the sort of thing you would see in Antwerp. Antwerp, where there are international exchanges, where money is coming and going from different countries. He changes money, right? Your German mark into your Flemish mark, right? Each has a different valuation, right? He's the Barclays Bank, right, of the 16th century. And he is in his shop with some things people have traded, probably for money, the pewter plate, the rosin beads behind him, that wonderful goblet in the left corner, the pearls, right? All of these things he's gathered around him as signs of the wealth, and he's checking the value of his money, because money, we're used to money being only valued because the government says it's worth something, right? Our quarter, our 25-cent piece does not have 25 cents worth of metal in it, right? We'd go broke if we did that as a country, right? It's cheap. It's made of crap metal, right? And it's worth 25 cents because it's stamped 25 cents, right? Coins in the 16th century were worth what they were stamped with because of the weight of the metal, right? So a 2-pound British coin was worth £2 because it had 2 pounds, or not pounds, 32 ounces, but 2 pounds worth of gold. So if you're crafty, sly, devious, you could take an impression of the stamp, make your own stamp, shave a little bit of that metal off, stamp it again, and you've got a 2-pound coin that's now worth £1.05. Really, right? But it still says it's worth 2 pounds. So what he's doing is he's checking to make sure that he's not been ripped off, right? He's checking to make sure that the coins are the weight that the mint mark says they should be, right? Checking the value of his money. And that's sort of just a normal, everyday thing, right? But we can see it as being one that's sort of full of metaphoric content because, of course, checking the value of money means that where are your priorities, right? Everyday life, money. And with his wife next to him, she's got a Bible. It's a prayer book. And you can see that Matthesius has taken pains to show us a page with the Virgin and Child painted on it. And she's not reading it, right? She is distracted from her Bible to look at his money. And as she's doing her book, right, as she's flipping through the book, you'll notice what she's doing, right? If you look at your notebook, right, she's going this direction. She's not even reading, right? She's flipping back to front. Like you're waiting at the airport and you buy some really crappy magazine, right? And you sit there flipping through it to see what the pictures are. And that's what she's not even paying attention. And so this is genre scene, this scene of everyday life is kind of loaded with moral content, right? It's an instructive picture. You're supposed to look at it, and on a certain level in the 16th century, you would have seen it to be slightly humorous. Here she is, ostensibly praying, but she's distracted, right, from her prayers. There's nothing wrong with being interested in money. That's part of life. But if you're going to be devoting your time to prayer, then maybe it's time to find a different way to do that, and not be purporting to put on these airs of being sanctimonious, when in fact you're just as interested in money as your father, as your husband is, right? And the guy in the mirror is actually reading the Bible closely. So there's this back and forth between the two of them, right? So our scene of everyday life, our genre scene, has moral content, has allegory. And this is the exact same, this is sort of a tradition, a legacy that would have been started with Van Eyck, and that sort of symbolism we saw with every element in the Van Eyck meaning something, right? This is sort of picks up on that idea, but it divorces it from the strictly religious sphere and now puts it into everyday life, right? A genre scene, a scene of everyday life, which is something you might see around you, but always chosen with the idea of inserting a message about proper community engagement, right? Proper moral bearing. Right? And what we find with, especially in the 16th century, what we find with these images is that they're most often showing us how not to behave. Because that's a lot more fun, right? Than looking at people doing everything right. You think, I can't do that, right? But if you see these people that are out there and just messing it up, then you go, okay, I better not do that, right? So this is what Matthesius specialized in, right? Were these images of genre scenes. Other artists at the same time are specialists in portrait painting. Think of Holbein, right? Even though he's in England. Specialists in landscape painting. Now, the word genre is a bit confusing because the word genre just means type, right? So painting is a genre of, landscape is a genre of painting, right? Movies, horror films are a genre. Rom-coms are a genre of movies, right? The bromance. These are all genres of film. But when we talk about a genre scene, right, that means a scene of everyday life. Right? And Matthesius does this. We got a really nice one down at the National Gallery. Is someone in this class working on this? Someone in one of the classes is working on it. The ill-matched lovers, right? Same painter, same idea of using a scene from everyday life, probably a scene set in a tavern, we think, and to show us again sort of how not to behave. So let's look at the picture, right? We've got this. I made the joke last night. This is the Harvey Weinstein picture for this class, right? We got this lecherous old man, right? As ugly as can be on the right. Yellow teeth, the ones that are left, right? I've got a detail of him coming up. And he's got this lovely young woman that he thinks is all over him, into it. But really, he's all over her, right? And you can see what's going on is that he thinks she likes him. But does she? What's she interested in? The money, exactly right. So she's got his, her hand on his chin. She's, stroking his little stubble. And he's got his hand behind her head. He's going to bring her in, right? And he's copping a feel as well, right? But she's got him so distracted that he doesn't realize that she's picked his pocket. And she has a little sack of money that she's handing off to this guy in the back who's making faces. He looks kind of drunk. But certainly what he's doing is he's mocking that old man. And he can't see him. Ha ha, we got him. Right? She's her accomplice. And he's got his tongue out. Right? He's sort of doing this. Making donkey ears at him. And in fact, the reason we do this, do anybody do that anymore? Am I dating myself? Right? Is we're making donkey ears. Right? That's because jesters in the Middle Ages and Renaissance wore costumes with donkey ears. And that's what he's got on. Right? So that's a jester back there, meant to show that they're making a fool out of this guy who thinks she's in love, but in fact, anything but. She just wants his money. Right? And by the way, she's already probably got some of it on the up and up, so to speak. They've been playing cards and gambling. Right? You see the deck of cards and the coins on the table. And you get the sense that there might be some sort of story that we're meant to invent here where she's, cheating him at cards and she's not getting the money quick enough. So maybe it's time to sort of, shift your tactics and just steal it outright, right? And then we're at that moment where she's handing off the money. I looked at this picture for years before I realized that she's not just tickling his chin. She's actually, and this makes it even funnier, right? He's going for the next step. So he's already sort of groping her. He wants a kiss, right? And he's got his head bent. He's pulling her in. And look what she's doing. She's not tickling his chin. She's like, look at how the fingers go into the flesh on his chin and on his cheek. She's like, we are not kissing, right? That is not happening. You may be able to touch my breast on the top of my clothing, but we are not going there. And if you look at his teeth, it's a pretty wise decision on her part, right? He's probably got pretty foul breath, right? But he still is like lecher. This is great. And look at this Ikean detail, right? This Northern Renaissance, late Gothic Northern Renaissance interest in details. The stubble on his chin, the dirt on his teeth, the bluish temples with the veins on the side, right, are just so detailed in how they're depicted, and that's again the legacy of Van Eyck. So another moralizing scene, right? I'm the only old man in this room, but don't think the young girls are into you because they're probably not, right? Don't think you're all that anymore because you're not. And a warning of sorts, right? How not to behave, using humor to instruct, right? Another artist from this period who you may have heard about before, Bosch, Hieronymus Bosch. He's one of those artists that to Northern Renaissance art is kind of what Leonardo is. This is one of those artists people know about, have heard about before. And we're lucky to have a pretty good Hieronymus Bosch here. In fact, probably the best one in America is here in the National Gallery. It shows a miser at the end of his life. A miser, someone who hoards money. And we think he appears twice. The guy in green is probably the miser during his life, putting money into the chest. And then reappearing a second time at the moment of his death, on his deathbed. Right? Death is coming through the door to take his soul away. And at the moment of his death, he still can't figure it out. That maybe there's something more important than money, right? You know, the old adage, you can't take it with you. He hasn't figured that one out yet, right? I think he's still trying to take it with him. So here's our image of death coming through the door, right? Bosch is a kind of interesting figure in that it's equally detailed, but a little bit more cartoonish than what we've seen before. You can also see, as we look at this detail, that the top layer of paint has gone pretty transparent for us. And we can see right through the colors to the original drawing that Bosch did on the panel before he started painting. And we can also see that he's changed his mind a few times, so that the arrow held by the figure of death used to be a whole lot longer, going almost as far down as the guy's hand, right? But he decided, for some reason, to shorten it. But all of those diagonal lines that we see, sketch marks, are on the panel underneath the paint. And originally would not have been seen, but through time, the paint has gone transparent, allowing us to sort of see how Bosch worked. So death comes, here's our miser, and you can see that just as he's about to die, an angel, his guardian angel, appears and says, hey, you know, think twice about your decisions, because you've got a choice right here, right now. You can either choose the bag of money that the Shape of Water guy is giving you down there, right? The creature from the Black Lagoon is showing up down below to offer him money, and he's sort of thinking about it, but his arms are crossed. He's also reaching up as the angel looks up to the upper left corner and says, you know, choose. And what is he looking at but a crucifix, right? Right coming down on him. And our old miser on his deathbed still hasn't made his mind up, right? He's at a crossroads. He could go one way, he could go the other way. And he's still deciding. So again, this is a very moralizing message, isn't it? That there are priorities in life. And there's nothing wrong with making money, but at the end of your life, you should think about your salvation, right? You should think about what's going on. Now, Bosch is particularly well known for these sort of creepy, crawly monsters that appear in a significant number of his works. He loved images of hell. He loved painting images of people being tempted, and those temptations given physical form in the forms of demons and monsters. And this particular work is full of them. Not only do we have this toad man handing off the money to the miser in bed, but we have in the foreground the miser probably a second time opening up his strong box, and inside there's a fellow that's dressed kind of like he is on the deathbed, another little rat-like creature holding open the money bags for him, right, to deposit his money in. And down below, with what I assume to be as an IOU or some sort of official document that's sealed with wax, there's this crazy hybrid creature, mouse with talons like a bird, down below mocking him. Another strange lizard-like creature whose only feet and haunches we see going underneath. In the foreground, there's a little winged figure. They ain't no angel. Leaning on the counter and looking at us as we contemplate the scene. Right? Bosch loves these sorts of things. Right? This sort of quasi-psychedelic, almost surrealist kind of world. Right? But again, intended now as a moralizing message. Right? And even our miser in the foreground has a rosary in one hand and money in the other. Things in balance. But at the end of life, should you still be thinking about money? Right? Because you can't take it with you. Now look at the composition, the overall way that Bosch has arranged the composition. You'll notice that there is an attempt to use perspective, although our northern artists are never that good with it. They're not trying that hard, right, to use mathematical perspective. But you'll notice that there is a sense of receding back to your right, and that the perspective focuses your attention from the left to the right. And we take that coupled with the dimensions of the piece, tall and narrow, would lead us to guess that this is probably part of a triptych, a work with wings that folded, just like Van Eyck's Annunciation was, and was probably the left-hand wing of a work like that. And this led scholars to begin to investigate it scientifically. So what we did is we took sample, I wasn't there, right? What we, the scholarly community, did. Took samples of the wood, right? The nice thing about wood as a support is we can identify, based on scientific analysis, when it was cut down. When was that tree felled? And how do we know? Tree rings. Right? All these panels came from the same region. And you know how tree rings work? Right? A tree ring, trees grow like this, right? In rings from the center outward, right? And so every ring on the tree represents a year, a season. Okay? If it's a particularly wet year, it's thicker. And if it's a particularly dry year, it's thinner. Right? Xylem and phloem, I somehow remembered that from when I was in undergrad, right? It's stuck in my mind. Somebody taught me well, right? And so the thing is, you can find a pattern of these using furniture, parts of houses, and you can set up a timeline saying, okay, this is when this wood came from, based on the range of tree rings. Pretty cool, huh? We took a sample of this and we can tell what piece of wood it came from. And lo and behold, we know also that it came from the exact same wood as these two works, which were probably originally part of one composition. So we have another situation where a painting was cut up by a dealer who could sell one triptych or could sell multiple works instead. And these were hinged and then folded over the center, right? Just like the Ghent altarpiece, right? And we know from looking at the wood that these came from the same tree, cut at the same time, right? By scientific analysis of the wood. The top and the bottom have been separated and trimmed, and they're also from the same wood. There are cracks that run through it, right? And so what we see is the man at the end of his life, right, figuring out what's the right path to take. And these add to the understanding of that picture, because here is the ship of fools, or a ship full of stupid people doing stupid things. And in front of it, representations of the 7 deadly sins, right? Traveling through a landscape, right? The 7 deadly sins. So our guys kind of at the end of his life, we have no idea what was in there, sadly, right? We don't know what was in there. That's entirely lost. But our work is part of a larger work that's meant to sort of instruct on our passage through life, eventually leading to death, and the kind of choices we made and the impact they might have on our salvation at the end of it, right? That's how our work is meant to be seen. But again, we see it isolated in the museum. Now, with this scientific analysis of the wood, one of the things that we did with x-rays was to figure out that there are certain cracks that run through this. And lo and behold, there's a painting in Rotterdam that is the exact same wood on the other side. So someone, in cutting up this work, also shaved the wings laterally and took the two outside parts, which is what you would see when it was closed, and glued them together into a single work. So originally this guy was square, right? And this was the back of this. We know that from, like I said, a scientific analysis of the wood. And again, the same idea holds true. This theme runs through it. Life and its choices. People at the crossroads determining their fate. That fate resting on the choices that they make. So in this case, a wayfarer or a peddler, the thing on the back of his backpack there, right, his picnic basket, is the goods that he's going to sort of sell at the side of the road. And he's walking on a path through life, and he's moved sort of here in the foreground, and it's a path that's fraught with peril, and growling dog, right? Angry cow, right? And he's about to cross another threshold, the gate, right? As he moves through life. symbolize and move through the landscape. Right? And he's just passed this house, but he's wondering whether or not he should go back. Right? He's thinking twice about it. He's looking over his shoulder. What's going on back there? And some people think that he's pondering going back. Other people think, made it past that. Right? Didn't stop there. And if we look at that house, we look at it closely, we realize that this is a house that's like the dog, potentially dangerous. Look at the roof of the house. It's broken, right? This is not a well-kept place. Look at the windows and the shutters, right? This is a decrepit house. So that is a way of symbolizing that it's not a good place to go, right? Again, just like in horror films, right? The creaky old house. But it's made more than that when we look more closely, because there's a soldier in the doorway groping at this woman. This is probably a brothel, a house of prostitution. He's hung up his spike, and that's probably totally pre-Freudian sexual metaphor, right? The big stick outside the house as he gropes. Birds in cages are symbols for marital fidelity, and that's hanging outside of this, and this is now infidelity inside, right? We have the sign for the inn is a goose, right? Think of the gooseneck. Do I have to spell it out? Get the idea. And to drive the point home, right, we see somebody looking out from outside the broken windows. We have peeing on the side of the building here as well, right? So he's made it, right? He's passed this behind, and he's sort of looking over his shoulder in a way that Brittany and I could interpret totally differently. I could say, he's thinking about whether or not that might be a good place to go. Or he's going, got past that, right? That temptation's behind me now. Right? A lot of people suggest that maybe he's based on the parable that Christ tells of the prodigal son. The rich man's son who goes off and wastes all of his inheritance and then is welcomed back with open arms by his father. Right? How does he spend his inheritance? Goes to a whorehouse, gambles, and they steal his money. Just like our old man in the Ilmax Lovers. Right? That's where he loses everything. And then he ends up sleeping with the pigs. And lo and behold, there's a trough with pigs. Right? Now, is this meant to be the prodigal son? Probably not, but it's taking those ideas, right, and turning them into part of the metaphor. So again, as we understand, well, it's not there anymore, understand our work in the National Gallery, right, remember that it's all part of this group of works that functioned as a folding triptych. And again, not religious at all, even though triptychs are usually altarpieces, right? Not religious at all, but rather intended to instruct on proper moral behavior. Now, Bosch's single most famous work does this in spades, The Garden of the Lights. And I just want to show this to you really briefly because it's an intro to art history class, and it's one of those things you probably should see. One of those 5 works of art one should see. It's in Spain, right? Not local. It's huge, 7 feet across, the center panel only, right? So open like this, and again, it's a triptych. It would be a good 14 feet across, right? Bigger than this screen. And Bosch takes a sort of bird's eye view. We look down on this landscape in the center, and it's just filled with detail. Again, that northern tradition of precisely rendered details. And what do we see as we look down this landscape? All sorts of naked people. There's a single person dressed in the entire thing. And they are doing all sorts of crazy things. Cavorting, eating fruit, playing with birds, playing with each other. Right? It's full of amazing details that are slightly humorous, but certainly intended to be erotic as well. Right? People engaged in naughty behavior. And some of it mysterious. The guy with the rat, what the heck, right? Coming into the tube down below. Or this other fellow touching his genitalia, but then that big piece of strange fruit with the bird coming out of it between his legs. I guess I don't have to say that. Monster duck. in the background, right? And he just sort of invites us to look at these things as closely as we can, right? Dive into it. And we see these people riding these horses in rather strange positions. This guy here seems to enjoy the fact that that bird's got his beak where the sun don't shine, right? Go figure. That looks like that probably hurts. But certainly, if I could ride a horse like that, I guess I wouldn't care about anything else either, right? 1 foot looking up between his own legs that way. So what we have here is wanton behavior, right? People frolicking nude, right? This is not meant to be a positive thing. This is part of that idea of showing us how not to behave, right? Which is the standard for these images. And to drive the point home, when we look at the left-hand panel, we read it as part of the same landscape. Who's that in the foreground? It's Jesus, but then who are the two naked people? Adam and Eve, right? So this is where it all starts. This is where Eve has just been created. She's being now presented to Adam by God who looks like Jesus, right? And he's looking right at us. Right? This is where it started. That stuff in the middle. And there's, even if we go back, right, to drive that point, I don't know if we can see that. There's some people that, look, there's Adam and Eve, right? And pointing directly to them. This is where it all began. And you'll notice in the foreground that there's some of these Bosch strange things, right? Some sort of unicorn fish, right? A bird with 3 heads. This one walking upright like a penguin almost, but with these strange cilia coming off its head. A flying fish swimming. Just all sorts of really, really odd stuff everywhere we look in the background. And I love this detail. I think he knew the Dürer print, right, of Adam and Eve, where, remember the cat and the mouse, where before sin happened? Well, that is, even though Eve is not fallen yet, it's like sin's already there. It's just happened, right? And there's our cat walking away as happy as can be, although it doesn't really look like a mouse as much as like a salamander in Bosch's hands. This all leads then to hell on the right, where sin is punished, right? That's where it's going to lead you. And what we see in Bosch's hell is sin being punished, where people are punished by the things that brought them pleasure. Right? The message of moderation. You don't do things too much. So you've got all these people that are being crucified by musical instruments. Right? There's a guy that's skewered on the strings of a harp that's been attached to a lute. You have a guy on the back of a hurdy-gurdy that's cranking the hurdy-gurdy, right, up there. But someone else back there is another thing being stuck up his bum. Another man tied to a flute, and there's this guy inside the flute screaming, right? Because as they play it, it's just loud. And he's got a pipe. He's playing the pipe in a rather interesting fashion. The guy he's been tied to it, right? He's figured out how to make a song by farting through a flute, right? Down below, there's a figure inside the kettle drum that the demon's beating on. I've had that before, you know? The bam, bam, and he's inside. He can, everybody's puking, and right, and it's our pleasure that brings us damnation, right? So the overall message of the piece is, things in moderation, but there's not a whole lot of moderation taking place in the altarpiece. That immoderation will be punished. One last detail, and then we'll quit. We think this is probably Satan as a bird on a throne, right? And he's devouring people. I love this sort of Wayne's World thing, the birds fly out of my butt, right? As he eats them. But he's then defecating the people that he eats down below to a lower level of hell that's somehow worse, where a guy craps coins into the realm, another man is vomiting in there, a mouse with talons groping at a woman with a toad on her chest, who's looking at her own reflection in this sort of tree butt of somebody else, right? Certainly vanity. So there's an overall message here. It's the same message we saw with Matt Sykes, which is there are ways to behave and there are ways to not behave, right? And as we're here in the Northern Renaissance, in Flanders in particular, we're finding this amazing interest in these moralizing scenes that use humor to illustrate improper immoral behavior with the idea that you see it, you don't think that's cool. You see it and you think that's what I should be doing. Okay, we'll look at a little bit more of this and move on into mannerism after the break, right? Some other things that are happening over the break, I'll be looking at the rest of the worksheets and getting those up, and also assigning due dates for the ones that are there. Some people have already started to turn in, which is great. I haven't given a due date for them yet, so you're not behind if you have them, right? It won't be the Monday after you get back, right? That would be crazy, okay? But enjoy your break anyway, and look for an email from me toward the end of the week with some updated due dates, okay? On things.
You said this is an altar piece?
No, it looks like an altar piece. It's the form of an altar piece, but yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Well, the size of it, right? Suggests that if it's going to go anywhere, it's going to be someplace big, right? Well, we know that about 10 years after it was painted, 1520, it was in the possession of the Duke of Nassau, Duke Henry II of Nassau. And we also know that Duke Henry II of Nassau's nephew got married right around 1510. So we're thinking that maybe it was sort of a humorous piece to decorate a wedding. That's exactly what the Birth of Venus was, right? Bob John's Birth of Venus was also for a wedding. It's hard to imagine that you would want this for.
Right, that was like I wouldn't look at that every day.
To be honest, it's the most.
I think it's amazing.
It's also one of probably the single most popular work in the Prado Museum. Right?
I think it's so cool.
Would you want to look at that every day?
Yeah,
Yeah.
every other
Would
week.
you?
I would too. Yeah, there's so much to see. I think it's hilarious.
You find something new and weird.
That's right. I mean, every time, and I've got the scan of it that you can find the monster. There's a couple really cool things that come up recently. There's a monster, like gazillion gigabyte scan of this, right? Like 130,000 bytes wide, or pixels wide, right? And in addition to that, there's a 3D recreation of the center panel where you can actually walk through it that they put up, right? They've gotten the technology together for that. It's meant to be horrifying. It's meant to be somewhat disgusting. But at the same time, there's something about Bosch's figures that's so doll-like and sort of playful that.
It's brilliant.
And this,
Wow.
like,
I just wondered where to go.
Right. Yeah, and these details are good because I've got that. These are not my photos, right? I've downloaded this huge scan from online. You can go find it. It is wonderful. And what it is, it's Van Eyck, but different, right? Because it is that same, like with Van Eyck, look at those details. You get in, you find things. But this is a different sort of finding, right? You find things that are just utterly sort of spectacular and weird and strange.
I know it's never fun, but isn't it because the iconography that you couldn't make religious works of art